Welcome to the selfgrowth.com show. My name is David Riklan, and I'm the founder of selfgrowth.com. Today, we'll be discussing leadership, specifically the concept of soulful leadership, including the importance of authenticity, integrity, and empathy. To help us understand these topics, I'm excited to interview Dr. Arthur P. Ciaramicoli, and we're just going to call him Dr. C for today. Make sure you have something to write with. We're going to be sharing a lot of important, valuable information today. Before we get started, I want to take a couple of minutes and share some information about Dr. C. Dr. C is a licensed clinical psychologist who's been treating clients for more than 35 years. He's a member of the American Psychological Association and the Massachusetts Psychological Association. Currently in private practice, he's been on the faculty of Harvard Medical School for several years, lecturer for the American Cancer Society, chief psychologist at Metro West Medical Center, and director of Metro West Counseling Center, and of the Alternative Medicine Division of Metro West Wellness Center in Framingham, Massachusetts. Really powerful background. Dr. C is also the author of many books, including The Soulful Leader, Success with Authenticity, Integrity, and Empathy, The Stress Solution, Using Empathy and Cognitive Behavioral Therapy to Reduce Anxiety and Develop Resilience. He's also authored a number of other books, Performance Addiction, The Curse of the Capable, quite a few other books. He's got a very strong background. His books have been published in more than 7 languages. And I just want to give you a website to go to get more information, and we'll bring it up again later. His website is balanceyoursuccess.com. So it's balanceyoursuccess.com. Dr. C, welcome to today's show.
Thank you, David. Thank you for having me.
All right, very excited today. Leadership right now is a very, very important topic based on what's going on in the world. And specifically, we're going to be talking a little bit about this concept of soulful leadership. So I want to jump right in. What are the characteristics of a soulful leader?
Soulful leader, David, leads with purpose, a sense of wanting to do service to others. They also lead from the bottom up, not the top down, meaning they want to encounter everyone in their company. They know who cuts the lawn. They know who services the computers. They know who plows the snow. They're intimately involved with all the people in the organization, and people know that. So it increases the spirit in the environment of the organization because the leader is seen as someone who generally cares for all that he or she encounters.
I like that concept a lot because a lot of times we think of a leader as someone who's just controlling, sometimes a bully. But for you, a leader is someone who cares about basically his community, and the community is the people who work for him.
Yes.
I like it.
We know from credible research, David, that environments of empathy in business, in the corporate world, produce happier people, produce brain chemicals that are very positive, which makes people more creative, more able to strategize, and it increases profits. Certain studies have proven that companies with the highest environmental empathy situations have profits twice as much as the ones in the bottom lowest 10%.
That's so interesting because you wouldn't necessarily think empathy, and we're going to get back into empathy in a little bit, but you wouldn't think that is such an important factor, but obviously it is.
Well, empathy is everyday mind reading. I mean, it's the capacity to understand and respond to the unique experiences of another. So empathic listening is critically important, not only in people's personal lives, but in their professional lives. Because if I don't listen to you and I don't see into the heart and soul of what you're trying to communicate or who you are, I'm not going to understand what your contribution can be or will not be. You really know how to place people in certain positions. You also know who to hire and who not to hire. Mm-hmm. Again, it's everyday mind reading. It teaches you to see beyond the surface, beyond the resume, beyond what people's appearance is, to see who they really are and what their character is about and what contributions they can make.
That's interesting. Let me expand a little bit because you mentioned when you start talking about leadership, more of a focus for a company and where a leader fits into a company. How important are a lot of these skills for individuals just in kind of being a leader in their own life?
It's critically important because we are a leader in our own families. We're a leader with our children. We can be leaders in the community. We can be a coach or a piano teacher. You're a leader. We're all in a position of authority at some point in life. So when you lead in a soulful way and you know how to do soulful listening, you are changing the brain chemistry of other people and yourself for the better, to make not only more contributions and increase profits in business, but also make yourself and others happier. And it includes integrity and authenticity, because people sense when we're pretending. People sense when you're faking an interest in someone else, or I was telling a story this morning about a CEO who used to come and interview us different department heads. And he used to always say to me, "So how's your sons? How's your sons?" And my colleague, when we would walk out of the meeting, he said, "You don't have any sons. Why do you let him say that?" I said, "Because he doesn't care. I told him I had 2 daughters years ago, and he still asks, 'How's the boys? How's the boys?'" And that particular person didn't keep people. Doctors left the hospital,
Right.
Nurses left, the spirit was low, because everybody knew that it's just a game for him. It's all about profits.
Right.
He didn't generally care about anybody.
Well, I think that's an important part. It's a genuine and sincere interest.
Yes.
And that's really a critical thing. A lot of people talk about, kind of feigning or faking this interest. But it sounds like in order to be a soulful leader, you need to be sincere and authentic about who you are and your interest in people.
Yes, because when you're pretending, like that CEO that I commented about a few minutes ago, you know it. It produces a stress response in the person you're talking to and a stress response in the other. And it produces a stress response in the environment as a whole. People don't want to go to work. What happens when you have stress in your system? You produce cortisol, the stress hormone that limits creativity, causes inflammation, causes anxiety, depression. It even kills neurons in the memory center of the brain. So when you think of that, 70% of Americans say that they feel disengaged at work. 70% say they wake up every night due to stress because they don't want to go to work the next day. Why do they feel disengaged? Because they don't want to ask a leader a question, because they feel that if they ask a leader a question, they're going to be demeaned and criticized and not heard. So why would you talk in an environment like that? So you see, when you walk into an environment like that, when I consult to businesses, I can tell just by the way they're eating. You see people eating donuts and candy, and the way they eat at lunch, because they're so stressed, they're looking for something to relieve them, to get some sugar to their brains to stimulate that pleasure center of the brain, because the environment is toxic. And we know that not only in the business and corporate world, but we know in the political world, we have many toxic leaders. And Americans now are yearning and longing for soulful leaders. They're longing for someone they can trust, that they feel is generous and compassionate and also smart and wise. They're longing for that person because they don't know where he or she is.
Yeah, I get it. What's interesting, and I mentioned, because you talk about cortisol and kind of the physical response to what I describe as bad leadership, and it takes a toll. It's clear. What's interesting is, years ago, we've talked about some of these things, but now there's a lot more science to back up the impact.
Yes.
There's a lot more science, demonstrable science to back up the impact of these type of behaviors on people.
Absolutely. When I wrote The Power of Empathy in 2000, I sensed that the giving and receiving of empathy did something to our brains, but I couldn't prove it. We know now through credible research, through functional MRIs, the giving and the receiving of empathy releases oxytocin, a near miracle neurotransmitter. Makes us more generous, more compassionate, reduces inflammation, reduces cravings for addictive substances. And it's one of the things I think many weight loss programs miss, is that when we're stressed and we release cortisol, it creates a desire for addictive substances. It increases fat cells. Oxytocin does the opposite. It reduces that craving. And many people call it the love connection. It makes you want to be friendly and engage other people.
I like it. So there's a few other areas. Let's jump in a little bit. So one of the things you talk about is authenticity. So what do you mean by authenticity or being authentic, and why is it so important in business?
It means simply being real. It means that if I'm going to have an ongoing relationship with you, you're a customer. I have to be authentic. If I'm pretending, if I'm lying to you or deceitful, and you can sense it, I'm going to produce that stress response in you, and you're not going to want to do business with me. Authenticity means I do have an interest in you as a human being. I also want to do business with you, but I'm very upfront about it. Empathic people are direct and tactful. I want to do business with you, but I can also care about you as a human being as well. Unlike my CEO who thought I had 2 sons for 20 years.
Was the CEO ever straightened out?
No. What would be the purpose?
No
I
value.
did it once. I did it once and he didn't remember. So what was the purpose?
Okay. Yep. I get it. So let's talk a little bit about something you call performance addiction. So first, what is performance addiction? Why is that important?
Performance addiction is the belief that status, image, and appearance will create love and respect. It's an irrational belief system that begins in our own homes and it's reinforced by our culture, but it's mythical. Performance addicts try to perfect their way into happiness, and they drive the people around them crazy in that regard because they're always comparing and contrasting themselves to others, but they're always comparing and contrasting their business associates, their employees, their loved ones, their kids, their spouses the same way. So they really create so much tension in other people's lives because they're very tense themselves. They don't have a dimmer switch. They don't know how to turn the dial down. They're always on and they're always preoccupied, which is why when they're trying to listen to you, you can tell their mouth is opening as you're speaking because they can't wait to talk. You know, it's what one of my patients calls reloading. You know, they're reloading when you're talking.
There's a phrase that I always liked where people are trying to get a word in edgewise. And I'm from the New York area. And one of the challenges sometimes is you should almost feel that people are just fighting and waiting their turn to speak.
Yes.
Not really listening. It's about, especially if you're in a group environment, a multi-people environment, you're just waiting to get in there.
Yeah. And people are interrupting each other all the time. So people are not really hearing anyone else on any depth or level. And they don't realize that what it's creating is a distance. You're producing hormones that make someone want to go away from you rather than come closer to you. And we have tremendous difficulty listening in this society right now. We're you know, you don't really take in constructive criticism from other people. You come back at them, you know, and sometimes in some of our leaders who have shown a degree of sadism, they want to hurt the other person because they're questioning them. It's not an open dialogue of let's look at all the possibilities. Soulful leaders love diversity because they know a diverse group means diverse ideas, means we can see the larger world. So if we're designing products, we see the whole world. If you take 10 white 50-year-old men in a group trying to strategize about products, you're preaching to the choir. You get no other opinions. So they know diversity. They love diversity because they know they can learn more. They learn from other cultures. And they have one positive quality that many of our leaders don't have today. They can acknowledge when they're wrong. They can acknowledge when they make a mistake. They have humility, yet they're confident. They are the people you turn to when there's conflict in the organization or in their own family, because they will sort out the difficulties and ascertain the facts. That's where empathy comes in. You know, empathy slows everything down because it's fact-oriented. It's objective-oriented. It's not like sympathy. The sympathy rushes in to console without the facts. It's kind of general listening. Empathy is very unique in that regard.
All right, well, let's talk a little bit about, so that's kind of a difference, empathy versus sympathy. So an interesting concept for me, and I think a challenge for a lot of folks is they feel they're not necessarily empathetic. They don't have a lot of empathy. Is empathy a skill that you can learn and develop? And if so, how do you go about doing that?
We're all born with the empathy gene. There's no question about that. We know that the human brain has empathy neurons. But if you're not responded to with empathy early in life, it lies dormant. It's like a muscle that you don't use. It atrophies. I have so many people that over the years who've joined my leadership and communication groups, David, and people told me they don't have the empathy gene. You know, I get a lot of referrals from HR executives who don't listen. And so, but over time, they will develop it. But it has to be unraveled. If you talk to a kindergarten or a first grade teacher, they will tell you that most of the kids, particularly boys, have empathy early on. But by the time they see that same young boy and from kindergarten to 4th or 5th grade, it goes underground. Why? Because it's seen as a soft skill. It's seen as something that doesn't matter. It's seen as something that doesn't let you get ahead, when actually it is something that lets you get ahead. And when parents understand that, they foster it more. But a lot of fathers with boys make it go underground And then when they're in the fourth or fifth grade, you see they're a little bit more callous. They're a little more aggressive, because who are they learning from? Their mentor, their dad.
Sure.
Yeah.
So what's interesting, and one of the things that you mentioned, the change from kindergarten to fourth or fifth grade, in our culture and or parts of our culture, empathy is almost considered a weakness.
Mm-hmm.
Like people are teaching it as a weakness, where clearly we're seeing in business and in personal lives, it's a strength.
It is the most important capacity that any human being can develop. The most important, because people who have empathy are happier in their personal lives and in their professional lives. Why? Because it allows you to see the truth. It's truth oriented. When you don't have empathy, you don't really see what's happening. You don't have a grasp on reality. You make decisions and make contracts with people, or even decide someone to be a love partner when you don't really know them, because you don't have the capacity to look beyond the surface. Someone's pretty or handsome and their resume reads well, and you want to marry them. And, as we know, that doesn't work out very well. Why? Because it's boring, because you can't be in love with a resume. It doesn't sustain itself over time.
When I always thought of empathy, I remember this phrase, I'm going to paraphrase it, of walking in someone else's shoes.
Mm-hmm.
I see empathy as this concept of being able to walk in someone else's shoes and kind of feel what they're feeling. Is that an accurate view of how you describe empathy?
Well, yes, in a sense. It is that capacity to understand. First, understand. I understand what you're saying, and I know how to respond to what you're saying in a unique way. In other words, what I'm responding to you uniquely, not interjecting my experience. Sympathy is you're going through a divorce and I'm going through a divorce. So I say, oh, I know, you must be devastated. You need a high-powered attorney. And you say, I'm not devastated. I don't need a high-powered attorney. We went to an arbitrator. We're fine. But me, I'm in a different situation. But as soon as I get that generality, because that's what egocentric listening is, you get the general. So you're going through a divorce, I'm going through, so we have the same experience. No, we don't.
Right.
Don't know until you ask.
So that comes back to, to be empathetic and to show empathy, you need this sincere interest. If you don't have that sincere and authentic interest, you're probably never going to get to a level of being empathetic with that person.
There is one exception, which is there is a dark side of empathy. When I wrote The Power of Empathy, I said Adolf Hitler had empathy. And I took a lot of grief from a lot of journalists when I was interviewed, because they said, how could that be? Again, empathy is everyday mind reading. Good salesmen have empathy.
Right.
Certain leaders who manipulate and influence thousands of people can have empathy. Psychopaths can have empathy. So there's a dark side, meaning that they become very good at reading you. And it can be used for a manipulative purpose. I'm basically talking about it being used for a positive purpose.
Right. I got you. It goes back to your earlier definition of what a leader is,
Yes.
who sincerely cares about everybody in the organization or everybody that surrounds them. They care about the people in their lives.
And when a leader does that, it's infectious. It's amazing. I've seen it over and over again. It's infectious. When a leader acts that way, you will see most of the people in that organization will act that way too, even when he or she is not present. That's the key. That's when you know an organization is functioning that way. Even when that person is not there, it still functions that way.
Right. Now, how do you develop that skill? So let's say you're talking about boys earlier, about boys, kindergarten to fourth or fifth grade. How do you then go take that fifth grader who's now an adult, whether it be a man or a woman, in the workplace, in their lives? How do you then work with someone? What does somebody need to do to start developing? Let's say that they get the concept and the value of empathy. How do they go about developing or redeveloping? It's not really developing because they had them at one point.
Yes.
How do you go about getting back in touch with those skills?
Well, you need to be in relationship to rational people who have empathy, who can help you. In other words, you need to have people that help you slow down, who help you balance the way you relate. If you're talking very fast, David, could you slow down? I'm not following you. I always say to people, I'm not that intelligent. I can't follow anything that fast. Can you just, humor me and slow it down a little bit? So you're calming. You need to be around other people who have that calmness in them, so that you can model it and you can see how to do it. in my leadership and communication groups, I have people who've been there for a while, and then
Right.
I have people who come in and new. When the people come in new, they're pretty fascinated by the way other people listen. And listening is the first piece. It's knowing how to slow down and listen. I gave an example not long ago where an executive was saying to me, he said, we don't have time for empathy in this business. You talk about this slowing down. I said, you don't have time for it. He said, and I said, look, I saw one of your people walk through the hall when I was walking in here. And I saw a person come up to that person and say, could I have a minute? And I saw the response. Whoever it was looked at that person who said, can I have a minute? He said, look, I'm in a rush. I'm in a rush. And he walked away. I said, that took about 20 seconds. In that 20 seconds, he could have said, I'm late for a meeting. Can you leave a message on my phone? I'll get to you later.
Right.
Same 20 seconds.
Mm-hmm.
So you have time for it. Don't tell me you don't have time for it. If you had responded to that person that way, they're on board. They want to follow you. You respond in that demeaning way, they're muttering under their breath, son of a,
Mm-hmm.
Can't believe you talked to me that way. That's why people don't want to ask questions of leaders. Why would you? When you're going to be responded to like that.
Well, I find in general, if you have a situation where people aren't comfortable asking questions, it means they're not going to be comfortable participating, adding ideas, you mentioned a diverse group getting a diverse group of ideas. If people aren't comfortable in the environment and aren't comfortable with the fact that they're going to be listened to, why would they contribute?
That's exactly the point. And that's where, when leaders say empathy is a soft skill. No, it's not a soft skill. It's a critical skill.
Right.
Don't you want all those people on board? Don't you want them working together? Don't you want even your family working together? Why not? This is where performance addiction is created. Because the whole idea there is the only thing that counts is how much money I put in your pocket.
Right.
Other than that, I have no meaning to you. Who wants to work under those circumstances? Who would want to live in a family under those circumstances? I was at a little soccer thing that my 5-year-old granddaughter goes to occasionally, indoor soccer. And I always remember this example last winter. So this fella's standing next to me like this, with his hands up, big guy, like 6'4" or 5. And his son picks up the ball and he runs over to me. He goes, Daddy, I got the ball. And he looks at me and goes, you don't pick up the ball in soccer. And then the kid, runs away. You can see he's very disheartened. And then he scores a goal. He gets it in the net and the father goes like this. So what's he teaching him? I don't love you overall for who you are. I loved you when you scored the goal. He's 5 years old. Just all you had to do is kneel down and say, honey, when you don't pick up the ball in soccer, you got to keep it on the floor. You got to kick it. That's all. Same amount of time. What are you creating in that child? Stress, anxiety, high achiever with high anxiety. That's the beginning of performance addiction.
Yeah, well, you're creating a situation where you're teaching performance addiction.
Yes.
Teaching, you perform well at a high level. I'm going to reward you. You don't, I'm going to punish you. It's very simple. Exactly. Of course, you're going to get it. It's natural. Of course, you're going to get an addiction. You're going to want this above all else. I get it.
Because you want his love. You want your boss's love. So if the only thing that counts is what you produce, that's what you think love is. And if you got it in your family, like that little boy, very hard for me to not intervene with him, incidentally. If you got it like he's getting it, and then he's in school and achieving and playing sports or whatever he's doing, it's overwhelming. These kids are so anxious.
Right.
I used to consult the Harvard Health Service, and one of my colleagues who ran it said to me, I've never been in an environment where there's so much anxiety. Why? Because they're all competing with each other.
Sure.
It's so hard to become a friend,
So one of the things you mentioned a few times is the power of love. And I typically I think a lot of people don't necessarily think of love as something that corporate leaders should espouse or be part of. Why is love important for a corporate leader in a corporate environment? And if so, why is it so elusive?
The longest study that's been done on men in terms of happiness is the Harvard study. It started, I believe, in the 60s. They followed this group of men up to now, and it was updated last year. And they're trying to figure out, ascertain what causes happiness in these men over all these years. So the people that were the happiest, They asked them to say, what is the main reason that you've been happy most of your life? 76% of those men said it's because of intimate relationships. Interestingly, they were also the most successful men. So why is love important? If I feel love in this environment that I'm in, with my wife, with my children, I'm fueled with happy chemicals as I walk out the door. I'm creating resilience to cope with the stress of that world. If I come home to stress and go back to stress, what am I going to do with it at night? That's why people drink too much, drug too much, eat too much, take sleeping pills. You know, we have a preponderance of that in this country right now because people don't know how to unwind. But I always say, if you don't wind up, you don't have to wind down. If you have the love that you're coming from, your home is your support, your security, you'll go into the world and you can take the emotional blows of the world better. Right. You're more equipped because you have produced brain chemistry before you even leave your house to protect yourself against stress. You're in a position to protect yourself against stress.
Okay, makes a lot of sense. Goes back to some of the science you talked about, cortisol versus, you know, other chemicals that your body's creating in terms of the emotional impact and get you through the day. I like the concept.
The way you relate on the stress level, cortisol, you relate with empathy, you're producing oxytocin, serotonin, which antidepressants produce. So when you learn how to actually regulate your own brain, you can't resist it after a while because you feel better. Who doesn't want to feel better? Soulful leaders are happy people. They walk through the building, they're happy. But they know how to play too. They have a dimmer switch. They turn the dial down when they're not there. They don't want to talk about work on the beach.
Makes sense. Another area that you mentioned, we've talked about this a few times, the importance of these listening skills. And I know you talk about in your book something called soulful listening. So what exactly, how do you define what is soulful listening and how does it differentiate from just listening?
Egocentric listening, David, is just getting enough of the surface. It's very general. You say something that, you know, oh, I went to Brown and I said, oh, I knew somebody who went to Brown, and I start telling a story about Jake Smith from New Jersey who went to Brown. And you're saying, what the hell does that have to do with anything? Soulful listening is using empathy to enter into the heart and soul of another person's experience. It's depthful. It goes beyond the surface, and human beings cannot resist it. How many, many, many times I've been told, this guy won't talk to you, that guy won't talk, that woman won't talk to you. Human beings can't resist being listened to on that level because they're not accustomed to it. Some people are like in my Friday morning group, they're all executives. After they leave, they'll come in all, you know, wound up, and then they leave, they're very calm. And I said, well, why do you think you're very calm? Because we've been listening to each other. What if that happened in a staff meeting? Can you imagine what kind of ideas you would be producing?
One of the things I like about what you just talked about was this concept of, that's very common, of egocentric listening. And I see that all the time. And that goes back to listening specifically so you can jump into the conversation.
Right.
And a lot of people do that. I'm guilty of this at times myself, because there's an interest and a perception that I want to get my word in. But I see it's definitely off-putting because you're just listening for your opportunity to trigger something that you can talk about. And that's not a way to build and bond and build relationships.
It's like the episode on Seinfeld with George when he wanted to know why his fiance wanted to break up with him, and he went to a psychiatrist, and the psychiatrist said, you got to listen to her. And so he said, well, how long do I have to listen? He goes, well, at least a couple of minutes. So we got a stopwatch. And he said, okay, 2 minutes is up. Let's talk about me now. You know, yeah.
No, I get it. And there's a lot of people that fit into that kind of category. You know, as much as they're mocking the concept, the reason it's funny is because we see it all the time.
Yes. And the irony is when you learn to listen soulfully, it's a mental vacation from yourself. You know, I give the example of, I have some back issues. Okay. So one time last winter, I was shaving on my knees. That's how much pain I was in. So I have a home office. It's over my garage. I have a separate entrance. So I go up to, my wife is concerned about me. I go up to the office. I listen to my 9 o'clock patient, my 10 o'clock patient, my 11 o'clock patient. I come down for lunch and my wife says, how's your back? And I said, what? She said, how's your back? I said, what do you mean my back? And then all of a sudden I felt the pain again. Why didn't I feel the pain when I was up there with those three people? Because I was in their movie. I was in their world. It was like watching a good movie.
Sure.
It takes you away from yourself, from your troubles.
Makes total sense. You're getting the focus of yourself. If you focus completely on yourself all the time, you're going to focus on your pain, your issues, your problems.
It's like looking in the mirror too long.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you're going to find flaws. I always say, shave, take a shower, and get out of there. You know, just don't perseverate, because you're going to find something you don't like.
Right. Soulful organizations. How is a soulful organization? You talked about the value of kind of soulful leadership. How is a soulful organization created? How do you go about creating that?
Well, it starts with a leader who's empathic, who listens attentively, who's humble, yet confident, a leader who is relied upon in conflict to slow down and ascertain the facts, not impulsive, not make quick judgments. When you have an environment like that led by someone, it is, as I said earlier, it's infectious. It spreads throughout the organization. Studies at Princeton, Harvard B School have proven that when you react that way, it just ripples through the environment of
Right.
your organization. So it starts with the leader, but when you really know it's present, as I had said earlier, the same attitudes and behaviors exist when that leader is not there. When she or he is not there, the people in the organization still act that way.
I would imagine that's when you know you've impacted people.
Yes.
When they're starting,
Yes.
because really what's happening is they're emulating, and we do this all the time. We emulate our leaders.
That's why I wrote the book, David, because I'm so concerned with the leaders right now in our corporate world, in our business world, to some degree in our educational world, very much so in our political world, because we don't have the leaders that people are longing for that model this, especially for young people. You know, soulful leaders love to work with young people. That's another piece. They love to tease out the potential of young people. And they love to identify someone with a lot of raw talent. They love to bring those people along. They have a great interest in young people.
I like the concept. So one of the things we've talked a little bit about is the importance and the value of giving, because the leaders they're giving. And I know one of the things you talk about, I think you talk about in your book, is that giving to others actually changes your brain chemistry.
Yes.
How does that work?
Well, it's similar to, it's helper's high. It's what people get. It's what marathon runners get, or runners get, or when we exercise intensely aerobically. You're releasing endorphins, you're releasing serotonin, you're releasing oxytocin, you're releasing feel-good chemicals when you give. You know, there was a study done by the MacArthur Foundation several years ago, which was fascinating. It actually became a book, which they were trying to determine where are the people that live the longest in the United States. So some people were thinking, oh, it's got to be a warm climate, so forth and so on. The group that was living the longest was a group of nuns in Seattle. They didn't have the housing that the priests had, but they were living in these little room houses, and they went out into the streets every day and gave food to the poor and brought them into a soup kitchen. They were so loved. They were living into their 90s and some over 100. They didn't have much wealth, had very little wealth. They didn't have great accommodations. They didn't have status, even in their own organization, but they had love. And when one of them would pass away, the churches would be full.
Right.
Because of what they gave, because they were happy people.
People forget the large impact that has, not only in the people that surround us, but on ourselves. It's a very interesting concept. What impact it has on our health, not only our emotional health, but our physical health.
People who can elicit the neurochemical oxytocin, it has been proven, have longer lives, less illness, reduces inflammation, reduces addictive cravings, as we talked about earlier. It protects the brain and our physiology from illness. So when you know how to do that, interestingly, this is what hooks in narcissistic and selfish leaders. You know, some people, when I consult to a corporation, they'll say, oh, he'll never listen to you, she'll never listen to you. But when they realize that they can get something out of it, then they say, oh, it changes your brain. Yeah, it changes your brain. Well, tell me what to say. I said, it's not quite a technique like that. Well, tell me the 10 things to say. It's not like that. You have to learn how to be empathic. And every human being in front of you is different. So I can't tell you the 10 things to say to Joe that you could say to Mary, you could say to Harry. It doesn't work that way. They want a technique because now they feel like they're going to get something out of it. Exactly what you said.
Okay.
You don't get something out of a technique. You get something out of it when it's authentic.
I get it. Sincere, authentic. And that's really something, a theme that goes through everything that you talk about.
Yeah, yeah.
Now, you had a concept called image love. What exactly is that? What's image love?
I'll give you an example. I was interviewing a couple not long ago. They came from California. He was a CFO and she was a receptionist. 24 years difference in their ages. She the younger. So they married. Okay. He was laid off, making a lot of money. Came to Boston to work for a startup that failed in 8 months. So she called me up and she said, well, I don't want to tell my husband directly, but I want a divorce. So we scheduled the meeting. So we came in and I asked her and she told him in the session. And I said, well, why do you want a divorce? What's going on? She said, well, when I met my husband, he was in a 3-piece suit. He was out there lecturing. Sometimes he'd give a talk to 2,000 people. He was on local TV. And now I come home and he's in sweatpants looking for a job on the internet. And I said, so how is it that you don't love him anymore? I just changed. My feelings changed. That's image love. Image love is based on a resume and what you look like. And that's what performance addicts do. They pick a person based on how much you're going to reflect back to me self-worth.
Mm-hmm.
So now you're an extension of me. You're not a separate person. You're supposed to give me more self-worth.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what this man was doing for her. But then once he didn't have the 3-piece suit and the big income job, he wasn't the same person, but he was the same person. But she never knew the same person. She never knew him as a unique individual. That's what image love is. It's choosing someone based on a resume and appearance. And performance addicts consistently are involved with image love because they're looking for that image to prop them up.
What's interesting to me is that seems to be fairly common in our society, that you get attracted to the image, and whether that image is someone who's successful, making a lot of money, whatever it is, people tend to look at themselves and find themselves attracted to it. So you're right. The second that whatever that image is falls apart, the relationship's going to fall apart.
We are in tremendous need in this society of realizing that image and status, when it replaces character and integrity, is an enormous problem. We have to teach character integrity first. That's what AIE leadership is all about. Mm-hmm. If you don't have good character and you don't have integrity, I don't care how much money you make.
Right.
You're going to be unhappy. We see a lot of multimillionaire unhappy people. We just heard about them in the last week or so, right? Money doesn't, all the studies show that once your basic needs have been satisfied, all that extra money doesn't produce happiness.
Right.
Mm-hmm. It may make your life easier if you enjoy what you're doing. What if you hate what you're doing?
Right.
But you think it's all, I have to do it. I remember treating a surgeon years ago, hated his grandfather and his father were surgeons. He said when he was a little boy at 2 or 3 years old, they used to give him the butter knife that cut the meat on the chicken to try to teach him how to be a surgeon.
Right.
And he was a wonderful artist. He wanted to be an artist all his life. And then he was in that prison because he said, I can never not be a surgeon with the amount of money I make because I think my wife would leave me.
Mm-hmm. I get it. So we've covered a lot of material today. So I have one thing I'd like to kind of wrap this up. What's the one final big message you'd like to leave everybody?
Expand your empathic range and you will be a happier, healthier individual, and you will have the respect and love of many other people around you. It's the most important capacity to develop and expand in your personal and professional life. All
right. Expand empathic range. I like that concept. So I'd like to just wrap up here. Thank you very much for sharing. You've shared a lot of information. And I want to remind everybody to get more details on what Dr. C is doing, to find out more about his book, to get his book, go to balanceyoursuccess.com. So balanceyoursuccess.com. And the book he's been talking about today is The Soulful Leader, Success with Authenticity, Integrity, and Empathy. So once again, thank you for joining us. Dr. C, thank you very much. And I wish everybody great success in all areas of their life, in your life. All right, we'll talk to everybody soon.